come up here and follow that. Like, anyways, that's the transition. So, hey, how many of you are familiar with the work of Destiny Rescue? If you've been around here for a while, you've certainly heard about Destiny Rescue. They're a ministry that rescues children and young women from sex trafficking. And their hope is to rescue, to redeem, to restore, and to reintegrate them back into society. And Destiny Rescue is one of our ministry partners here at Community Church of Waterford. We'll talk more about them in a couple weeks. But how many of you, does anybody follow them on Facebook? Man, what a great week. I remember when we started partnering with them a few years ago, that you would see their weekly rescues, and you'd see, 3 kids were rescued this week, or 5 kids were rescued this week. Some weeks, no kids were rescued, and they were just real transparent about that. And over the years, it's kind of climbed a little bit, and every now and then you'll see something in the double digits for a rescue and everything. But last week, look what popped up on their Facebook page. 54 rescues. How awesome is that? I mean, we're talking, that's 1 week. 1 week, 54 children as young as 10 were rescued out of these different brothels and were placed into a safe place that's overlooked by Destiny Rescue staff and volunteers, where their stories of brokenness are going to become stories of beauty and stories of redemption. And I think that is an amazing thing to be able to celebrate. This year alone, Destiny Rescue has already had over 200 rescues. So that's a really cool ministry. I just think that's an awesome ministry for us to be partnering with. And again, we'll talk about them a little bit more in a couple weeks. The series we're in right now is called This Is Us. It's a series that reminds us of who God is calling us to be and what it is that God is calling us to do. And over the years, we've partnered with organizations that are going after those things that matter most to the heart of God. And we do this because it's both honoring to God and it pushes us to match our hearts and our wills and our plans with God's heart and God's will and God's plan for our lives. It challenges us to stop and take an inventory of those things that really matter in life. So what I want to do today is I want to take a look at that bigger picture of life. I want us to look beyond the day-to-day grind, and I want us to zoom out from the details of our broken relationships for a little bit, and I want us to focus on God's big picture for our lives. Because when we get that right, then we are far more likely to become the people that He is calling us to be and do the things that He is calling us to do, individually and together as a church family. So let's start off by having you finish this sentence. My number one goal in life is. My number one goal in life is. How would you complete that sentence? Just take a moment. What would you put in that blank? My number one goal in life is. What word or phrase would you use? Do you even know what you would put there? Has it been something you've ever even really thought about that much? Now let's look at this from a worldly viewpoint. When you look around us at the media, when you look at secular television, secular newspapers, secular magazines, secular businesses, what's the message that they're sending? Our number one goal in life is what? Work with me here, thank you. You got a little bit of interaction over here, all right? Things like money, right? A successful career, happiness, fame, popularity, fortune stuff. Now, what about for those of us who profess to follow after Jesus? Those of us who claim to live a different lifestyle than the world around us, how are we supposed to finish that sentence? My number one goal in life is. And did you know that God gives us a very clear answer for that? Before I give you God's answer to that statement, I want to tell you a story, and then I'll show you how it ties in with what we're talking about. And this is an analogy from my life that God laid on my heart 3 or 4 years ago. It stuck with me. And some of you have heard this particular, you may recall this story that I've shared one time before. But I think of it in especially times like this where we're looking at the bigger picture of our purpose in life. For the summers when I was 14, 15, and 16, I was a camp counselor for 8 weeks each year at Falcon Camp in Carrollton, Ohio. And it was this great camp on a lake where we could go swimming and we could go canoeing all of the time. And it had basketball courts, it had volleyball courts, and tennis courts. It had horseback riding, it had woods lore where you could learn how to survive off the land, and it also had riflery and archery ranges. And the first summer that I went to camp, I tried to follow in my older brother's footsteps by becoming king of the rifle range. And it took all of one day for me to be banned from the range, partly because I couldn't hit a target if I was 10 feet away from it, and partly because my brother was the instructor and he was trying to disown me as quickly as possible. And on the way back to my cabin, I was sulking and dejected. I happened to pass by the archery range. And one of the instructors saw me, and he encouraged me to join him for a lesson. And fortunately, in those days, they didn't have cell phones yet, so the word hadn't spread like lightning around camp through text messages that the younger Russell brother had no skills whatsoever. So I picked up a bow, and once I figured out which way the arrows were supposed to face, which you only make that mistake once, then I actually picked it up pretty quickly. And by the end of the first week, I was spending hours at the range, and I improved steadily. And by the end of the summer, I was one of the best shots in camp. And when I returned for my second summer, I was asked if I would actually be interested in being one of the instructors for archery. And I jumped at that chance. It did wonders for my ego as well. I would teach the younger kids how to shoot, and in between classes, a number of them would hang out to watch me shoot and see if I could break my scoring record. Now, if you're familiar with archery at all, you know that you'll recognize this picture. There's a simple scoring system. That there's a 9, a 7, a 5, a 3, and a 1, where 9 is the outside ring, and then, of course, the closer you get, you have the 7, the 5, the 3, and the 1 is the bullseye. And every time you step up to the line and you aim your bow, you shoot the arrow, your goal is what? To hit the bullseye, right? That's what you're doing. And then it happened. During my third summer at camp, I was pretty much on par with Robin Hood when it comes to the archery range. So, well, if Robin Hood shot from 20 feet and in, that is. And the day came when I finally hit perfection. And in my mind's eye, there must have been at least 100 people watching that day, but I think in reality there was 4. So I took my 5 arrows, I went to the 20-yard mark, and one by one I put all 5 arrows in the bullseye. Perfect score of 45. Never did it before. The boys admired me, the girls swooned. Again, all 4 of them. But after practicing over and over again for 3 summers, I had become really good at aiming and hitting the bullseye. And I became the head instructor in archery my final year at camp. And when people wanted to know how to do archery well, they followed my example and my teachings. Now, here's the tie-in to our current series. Because when it comes to the ripple effect initiative that we're going to be in for these next few years, we want to make absolutely sure that we're hitting the bullseye. Now, let's go back to the original sentence I asked you to complete. How do you, or any Jesus follower for that matter, finish this sentence? My number one goal in life is. Because as Jesus followers, we have an instructor that we are supposed to look to and follow his example of what it looks like to do life well. And the reason I shared my archery story is because I was reminded of it when I read this verse of instruction from Jesus in 1 Corinthians 14:1. Let love be what? Your greatest aim. Let love be your greatest aim. For Jesus followers, that's how we finish the sentence. Our number one goal in life should be love. Every time we step up to the line, every time we make a decision, every time that we prioritize the many things that are going on in our life, our goal, our aim, our bullseye is always love. Why love? Because the Bible tells us that God is love. Not that he has love, but that he is love. And God's greatest desire is for us to become more like him. He created you out of his love, and he created you so that you could learn to love and get better and better at it in your time here on earth. So this idea of being able to complete the sentence, my number one goal in life should be, that isn't something new. It's been going on since the beginning of humanity. People looking for meaning in their lives and usually ending up aiming their arrows and placing their trust at the wrong targets. Instead of love being their greatest aim, instead of love being at the center, they put something else there instead. Status, success, possessions, power, privilege, comfort, prestige, money. Whatever color represents these different things in your life, they often put them in the wrong order, and our primary aim ends up being something that is self-centered instead of something that is God-centered. You know, one day while Jesus was walking down the street, a guy comes up to him and he says, "Lord, what is the most important command in the Bible?" In other words, this is a guy who's desiring to follow after God's will, and he's asking Jesus how he's supposed to prioritize all of the things that he's reading in God's word and figuring out what priority each command should have in relationship to all of the others. So he's in essence saying, "Jesus, can you tell me what really matters the most?" And Jesus says, "I can do that. I can summarize the entire Bible for you in just 2 sentences. If you get these 2 things, you get it. You get what life is all about." And this is what he says in Mark 12, verse 30. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And the second is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." That's pretty clear. He said nothing in the Bible, nothing at all is more important than these 2 things. Learn to love God with all of your heart and learn to love others as well. He said if you get these 2 things, you've got it. If you get these 2 things, then you've nailed the bullseye for God's will for your life of being who he wants you to be and doing what he wants you to do. Make love your greatest aim. He says, I want you to first of all learn to love me, and then I want you to learn to love everybody else. And if you go all through life, it doesn't matter how much you acquire, it doesn't matter how much you achieve, it doesn't matter how many accomplishments you make and how many rewards you receive or how famous you become. None of that matters. One day you're going to stand before God and he's going to say, did you learn to love me? That's why I sent Jesus, so you could learn to love me. And did you learn to love other people? Because that's what I put you on earth to do. It's all about love. This is what the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 16. Do everything in love. Now that second word, that's pretty significant. Say that word with me. Everything. Do everything in love. Not do as much as you can in love. It's not do everything in love if you're having a good day. It's not do everything in love when others deserve it. There are no qualifiers here. We can't use the excuses of, but they don't deserve it, or but they just make me so mad. We can't use those excuses to try to justify our actions or our thoughts towards other people. God says that he is love and that everything he does is done in love. Therefore, as those who claim to follow after him and desire to be more like him, we have to also learn to love in all things. But these 4 words, do everything in love, those are easy to say, but extremely difficult to live out sometimes, aren't they? At least I know they are for me, and I'm assuming there are some others here that understand where I'm coming from. Because I know I get pretty self-absorbed. I know I get irritated with people. I know I get real judgmental at times towards people. I know that I can lose sight of the bullseye that God has given me to do everything in love, and I make it about Chris instead of about God. And I'm guessing you know what that's like as well, don't you? So how do we do everything in love? We follow the advice that we read in 1 John 4:7. It says, dear friends, let us what? Practice loving each other. Guys, there's no shortcuts here. You have to practice. When I did archery, I couldn't expect to simply walk up on the range, pick up my arrows, and start hitting bullseyes on every shot. I was terrible at it first. I'm pretty sure 30 years later, there are still arrows 25 feet up in some of those trees if you go to that camp today. I'm positive of it. But I didn't give up. I kept practicing. I kept stepping up to the line. And with a whole lot of practice and perseverance, I eventually got really good at hitting what I was aiming for. And the same goes for us in learning how to love God and love one another. Maybe some of us aren't really good at it right now. None of us can say that we've arrived at hitting the bullseye every time, can we? But whether you're just beginning this journey of faith and learning what it looks like to genuinely love God and others, or if you've been on this journey for a long time now, maybe you've been on the journey long enough that you've stopped putting arrows 25 feet up in the tree, that you're getting a little bit better. Maybe you've finally at least started to hit the target. But there's always still more to do, isn't there? There's always practice that needs to be had so that we can hone our skills so that we hit the bullseye more often. It's easy to love people who love us. That's not a problem. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about loving the unlovely. I'm talking about loving the difficult. I'm talking about loving the irritable, loving the people who are different, loving the people who are demanding, loving people all around us who you don't feel like loving. You can't do that until you have God's love first flowing through you by entering into a love relationship with his son, Jesus Christ. But once you get a taste of his unconditional, crazy love for you, then you're going to find yourself in a place where you can offer more forgiveness, more grace, and more understanding to others. When you start to practice love, when you really start to make an intentional effort to be different in all of your relationships, people are going to notice. 1 Timothy 4:15 says, practice these things, immerse yourself in them so that all may see your progress. One of my greatest joys is watching people grow who are really going after it, who are obviously stepping up to the line and they're practicing over and over and over again. And they don't always hit the bullseye, but they're determined to make changes in their lives and they're committed to the process. They're committed to the practice of loving in their relationships. And inevitably, at some point, somebody in their life takes notice and they ask why the sudden change. And that person gets to share about the difference that a love relationship with Jesus Christ can make in a person's life. How important is it for us to hit the bullseye of loving in all things in our lives? Look what Jesus tells his followers in John 13. By this, listen to this. This is how important getting this love right is. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. If what? If you love one another. That's a huge verse. By this, by how you love each other, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. It is the signature in our lifestyles. How we love one another is supposed to be the primary way that the rest of the world takes notice and knows that we are for real, that we genuinely and sincerely believe that there is a God who is crazy about us and that he has an amazing plan for our lives, and that plan can truly make a difference, not just here on earth, but for all of eternity. When we talk about this is us, love has to be the main ingredient. Now, how many of you like to play board games? Card games, board games? Anybody like to do that? Okay, tell me this. How many of you are that person that has to read aloud every line of the instructions before the game can begin? Be proud. Be proud of it. I got more people pointing than I have raising hands right now. So, all right. And how many of you are like, hey, we'll just kind of figure it out as we go? How many of you are like that? Okay. A lot more of you are like that. I've had that. You play different card games. You play like Dutch Blitz or Hand and Foot. How many of you have played those two games? Man, if you walk in off the street to one of those games, you're like, what is going on? You have no idea, right? I mean, they're complicated games when you're first learning those. And I know, like, for me, I'm just hey, you know what? You can sit here and talk and talk and talk. Let me just watch you do it, and I'll figure it out. Anybody else like that? I mean, you can talk and talk and talk. Just let me sit back let me watch you play a game or two, and I'll figure it out. I'm going to be much more productive. It's going to sink in quicker if I see it lived out. Same thing. When it comes to showing this love that we're talking about, that God calls us to live out with one another. We can read and we can talk about it all day long, but ultimately we just need to see it lived out. We need to see it in action. And that's what Jesus did for us. For thousands and thousands of years, all the people had were God's written laws about love. They could talk about it and they could try to get it right, but it was kind of like me playing Dutch Blitz for the first time where it was like, am I doing this right? Kind of a thing. But when Jesus came and he actually lived among us and he lived it out, his followers were able to watch and see what it looked like to live a life of love up close and personal. And as a result, they picked up on it more quickly and it became more real for their own lives. We always learn faster and deeper when somebody gives us an example. This is what Jesus tells his followers in John 13. I have set for you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Jesus says, the way that I have modeled for you, the way that I have loved you, I want you to now pass that on to other people. I'm the model. I'm the way that you're supposed to look at. The way that I love you is the way I want you to love other people. And when we talk about this is us, part of that is following this example that he has set for us and how we live out love towards others on a daily basis. You know, at the end of his life here on earth, Jesus gathered with his followers and he started to talk to them about love again. But this time it had a greater context to it because now they had been with him for 3 years. And they had been up close and personal and seen what this looked like lived out on a daily basis for almost 3 years now. And like he is so prone to do, Jesus raised the expectation bar for his followers, and by doing so, he raises the bar for you and me as well. The Matthew 12 verse I read earlier, when Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment in the law was, the second part of that, after saying that we are to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, strength, and mind, he went on to say that we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. But in John 13, he raises the bar even further when he says these words, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Now, some of us, we read that and we just kind of move on. We're like, yeah, same old thing. It's not. No longer is it just love your neighbor. Now it's love one another. No longer is it up to us to define who we want to consider a neighbor. Now Jesus is saying that love is the primary aim in how we treat everybody. But Jesus wasn't done there. He raises the bar even higher. Instead of saying, love your neighbor as yourself, that was the original one, right? Instead of saying, love your neighbor as yourself, he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. Woo! We just raised the bar there, didn't we? Before it was, love your neighbor as yourself. We're kind of here. Now it's, as I have loved you, that's the way you're supposed to love everybody else now. That's a huge raising of the bar. In other words, his expectations of how we are to love one another is based on us following the example of how he loves us, not just based on how we think it should be shown. Love your neighbor as yourself. It tends to lead to us loving others based on how we want to be loved, which can be very self-absorbed at times. But this new love, this new command that Jesus calls us to is very specific in its focus, that it is to be consistent with the kind of love that he has shown to us. And Jesus' sacrificial life, it provides a clear and a concrete example of true love. And he put this love on display on a daily basis with his followers. He was patient with them. He showed great kindness. He had concern for their welfare. He instructed them. He counseled them. He comforted them. He prayed for them and he prayed with them. He corrected them when necessary. He showed great compassion towards them. And ultimately, he gave his life so that they and you and I might live. Jesus follows up this new command with the key truth. He says, by this, key words, by this, by how sincerely you show your love for one another, by this, everyone will know you are my disciples, that you are my followers. In other words, when others see how we live out this life of love that Jesus has called us to, they will look at how we live, they will look at what we do, they will look at what we say, and they will see Jesus, they will see love. This is the kind of people we want to be. This is the kind of church family we want to be. Because we are made in the image of a God of love. We have tremendous love to offer the world around us. And it should be our desire to be really, really good at showing God's love to others. But it doesn't just happen because we desire it to happen. We have to choose to practice this love every day of our lives. We have to choose to step up to the line and practice aiming at the bullseye over and over and over and over again. And as we continue to practice and apply what we know to be true, we will get better and better at hitting the bullseye more often in our relationships with other people. And when we get it right, the ripple effect initiative will be unbelievable. People will be drawn in. Lives will be transformed. Eternities will be changed. Hope will be found. Forgiveness will be given. Brokenness will be healed. Authenticity will be practiced. And love will reign supreme. We become a beautiful reflection of Jesus to the world around us, and people will be drawn to it. When it comes to this kind of love, let it be said that you are this kind of person. Let it be said that I am this kind of person. When others see how we love each other and how we treat each other and how we support each other and we do life together, let us be able to say, this is the real me. This is the real church. This is us. Let's pray. God, this is the kind of people we want to be. And we fall so short of it all the time. But God, we are reminded today of the power of love. We are reminded today of the power of authenticity. We are reminded today of what you can do in us and through us if we open up our hearts and our minds and our souls to be the people that you are calling us to be and do the things that you are calling us to do. But God, in order for us to do that, in order for us to reach those goals that you have placed on our hearts and our minds, in order for us to be effective and successful in the Ripple Effect Initiative, God, we have got to hit the bullseye. And it can't be something that we hit here and there. It's something that we need to be able to hit consistently, Lord. So help us to practice, God, on a day-to-day basis. Help us to step up to the line over and over and over again and aim for what is true, what it is that you have set up as being the greatest aim in our lives. Help us to love other people the way that you have loved us. God, you loved us so much that you sent your only Son, Jesus, to live a perfect life, to die on the cross on our behalf. That is an amazing kind of love. And what you ask for in return is our complete surrender to you, our laying aside of our own goals, of our own ambitions, of our own dreams, and lifting up the dreams and ambitions and goals that you have clearly set before us in your word and in the example of Jesus Christ. God, we are so grateful for the example of Jesus. We are so grateful for the stories that we can read that show us what it looks like to live this out on a daily basis. And God, we've all got a lot of work to do. Because if we're being honest about it, God, we are sitting here today, and the reality is a lot of us are just sitting here as hypocrites today. because we talk about this love. We nod our heads at wanting this kind of love in our lives, but we are not showing this kind of love to others. We're not showing this kind of love to family members. We're not showing this kind of love to coworkers. We're not showing this kind of love to our neighbors. We're not showing this kind of love in our communities. God, we've got to get this right. And the good news is that you promise to go before us. You promise to be with us. You promise to transform us into the people that you have called us to be. So God, we recommit ourselves today to this greatest aim of love. Help us to put it into practice every day. Help it to be at the front of our minds in every conversation and every interaction that we have. That above all things, your love needs to reign supreme. God, this is the kind of people we want to be. This is the kind of church we want to be for you. Because we know if we start hitting that bullseye more often, more people are going to be drawn to your great love. And that is what we are here for, is to live out this example, to draw other people to you and get a chance to tell them about a God who is crazy about them. So God, help us to live it out. Help us to recommit ourselves. Help us to focus anew on your great love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. We are the children of God, and we keep marching on. You know, that's the beautiful news of our God is full of grace. Our God is full of love. Our God is full of compassion. And if you're here today and you're thinking about this whole topic of love and you're like, man, I have not been good at this at all, the good news is God's like, hey, you know what? Today's a brand new day. And you keep marching on. If you're here today and you're thinking about this whole love thing and you're going, Chris, if I picked up the bow and arrow, I'm not even sure how to hold the thing right. I'd probably aim it in the wrong direction. That's okay. You got to start somewhere, right? It's like anything else. You got to start somewhere. But you got to start, and intentionally, you got to practice over and over and over again. You're going to leave here today, and you are going to have hundreds of opportunities to practice loving other people. Might be people in your family, might be people you come across in your community, but you are going to have hundreds of opportunities today alone. So take advantage of it, practice it, and love them well. Have an awesome week. Come back here next week for week number 3 of This Is Us. Prayer team's over here if you'd like to pray with someone.